Caro Rettore Mariotti, caro Sindaco Campus, caro Sindaco di Tempio, Addis, il Presidente del Conservatorio, IAI, il Presidente del European Forum, Chapman, l'Executive Director Edith, Emanuela Biffis from the Secretariat e la Professoressa Patrizia Patrizzi. Tutta la comunità di Sassari e di tutta questa terra ci ha accolto con uno stile davvero inusuale. Credetemi, mi capita spesso di portare un saluto introduttivo a eventi di ogni genere che riguardano la giustizia, ma mai mi è capitata un'accoglienza così. Davvero mai mi è capitato di essere accolta con tutte le espressioni di una comunità, a partire dalla musica, certamente, che mi ha accolto appena scesa dall'automobile, con le espressioni artistiche, i tappeti, ma soprattutto la partecipazione e questo nesso tra la tradizione che si rinnova in molti aspetti anche nel campo della giustizia. Davvero basterebbe questa prima mezz'ora per dare ragione e testimoniare la novità potente che la giustizia riparativa può portare nella vita delle singole persone e nella vita di una comunità. But let me now switch to English and to introduce a little bit the topic of this event. I am indeed deeply impressed by this forum, a lively global restorative community of practitioners, scholars and thinkers, and by the forum's activities, always engaged with national and European institutions to advance restorative justice in EU policies and law, in the UN and the Council of Europe recommendations and strategies, and in the national criminal justice systems and legislation. I deeply appreciate and praise the work carried out by many forum committees and working groups devoted to the most important topics in the field of restorative justice, such as training, values and standards, and research, and to advancing restorative justice in new and complex fields, challenging fields, such as policy work, gender-based violence, restorative cities, environmental restorative justice with institutions. And I also wish to express my appreciation for the work carried out with students, postgraduate students, local municipalities, institutions, and in particular prison facilities, by the University of Sassari, thanks to the insight and the wisdom of its team for restorative practices, and indeed the Tempio Pausania Restorative City Initiative. The conference program is very rich. It reflects the creativity of the restorative movement, its global dimension and local diversity, and its attention to several different justice needs. As Minister of Italy, Minister of Justice of Italy, let me also address a word of welcome to all of you, especially to the many coming from abroad. My warmest welcome to Italy, my warmest welcome to the field of restorative justice in Italy, a field where a lot is happening in these very days, weeks and months, thanks to a process of reform of criminal justice that for the first time in Italy includes expressly a chapter on restorative justice. I know that this international conference was initially due in 2020, and regrettably, for self-explanatory reasons, it had to be postponed twice. Yet, No other moment could be more favorable for this international meeting here in Italy. I say no other moment would be more appropriate because restorative justice is indeed at the center of several initiatives and circumstances. Let me mention and recall some of the most relevant ones. At the national level, Italy's criminal justice reform calls for the adoption of a comprehensive regulation on restorative justice's criminal matters. Parliamentary Law number 134 of 2021 mandates the government to draft one or more legislative decree regulating restorative justice in compliance with the international and European standards and according to a set of criteria established by the Parliament itself. These criteria include the operation of restorative justice in relation to criminal proceedings, the impact of restorative justice outcomes on judicial decisions, the establishment of restorative services, the training of mediators and facilitators. Building on national and international good practices and standards, this comprehensive reform requires that restorative justice programs shall be accessible and available at every stage of the criminal proceeding and during the execution phase, regardless the type of crime and its seriousness, upon free and informed consent and indeed on a voluntary basis. This would be impossible to conceive if we could not rely on strong experiences of restorative justice already in place, like the Tempio Pausania ones. The law binds the legislative decree to be consistent with the principle that restorative justice should be responsive to the interests of both the victim and the offender or the accused, and of the community. Furthermore, it demands that restorative outcomes are positively evaluated by the competent judicial authorities during the criminal proceeding and in the post-conviction phase. On the other side, failure to accomplish to a restorative program or to reach a specific outcome shall not have negative effects in criminal proceedings or in the execution phase, neither on the victim nor on the offender. This is taking place at the national level, but there is a broader European and international framework. The Venice Declaration has been already mentioned and has been adopted unanimously by the Ministers of Justice of the Council of Europe member states during a ministerial conference that I had the pleasure to convene during the Italian presidency of the Council of Europe last December. I have been informed with great satisfaction that the declaration is being used by many of you at institutional, academic, and practical levels, and it offers grounds, solid ground, for further actions, projects, and proposals. Indeed, it is important that the advocates of restorative justice, in their respective capacities, promote the implementation of the set of recommendations laid out in the declaration. For your further reflection during the coming days and to stimulate your policy work, I point out just a few issues stemming from the Venice Declaration, a short text but very rich one. First, I quote, "The development of national action plans or policies for the implementation of the recommendation of 2018 of the Council of Europe in order to make effective the right to access to appropriate restorative justice services for all the interested parties if they freely consent. Second, the promotion of the widest application of restorative justice in all the relevant sectors beyond the juvenile justice, aiming at desistance from crime, offenders' reintegration, and victims' recovery. Third, investment of adequate financial and human resources in restorative justice system for the safety and the well-being of our society. Fourth, promotion of awareness-raising campaigns and widespread communication around the benefits of restorative justice. Fifth, the introduction of restorative justice classes as an essential part of university curricula and training curricula of legal professionals, judges, lawyers, prosecutors, social workers, the police, as well as of prison and probation staff. But let me add a word on a broad, even broader international context. I had just taken office in last March when the Kyoto Conference was taking place. And I had the privilege of speaking online, indeed, at the time, to this conference. And that was my first opportunity to speak about restorative justice in my capacity of Minister of Justice. And to my surprise, a reference to restorative justice was also included in this important Kyoto Declaration of the United Nations on crime prevention. Let's pause on this link. The restorative justice also as an instrument of crime prevention. Last but not least, I would like to recall also the new EU Victim Strategy 2020 to 2025 that has triggered an ongoing process of revision of the EU Victims Directive. Thanks to the work of this forum, it is becoming a shared opinion that restorative justice can best contribute to address victims' needs because, I quote, restorative justice services provide victims with a safe environment to make their voice heard and support their healing process. Let me turn now on a different tone. I would like to share with you some of the reasons why, as a scholar, I am a professor, a university professor after all, as a former constitutional judge, and now as a Minister of Justice, I have been, and indeed I am every day committed to develop a culture and to create a legal framework for restorative justice in my country and on the European and international stage. My own turning point with the restorative justice was experiential. Besides my academic studies, I met restorative justice thanks to the Italian experience of the restorative dialogues among victims and former members of armed group of the age of the, let's say, political terrorism of the 70s and 80s. I had first the chance to come across these restorative experiences through the book of the encounter, Il Libro dell'Incontro. Thanks to Claudia Mazzucato, she's here, and other very good and very close friends that have contributed to it. A book that was written in order to disseminate the experience. It's always the same direction, the experience first and then the reflection. And then, after reading the book and listening to the authors, the protagonists of this experience, I had the chance to interact several times with the members of this restorative group. At that time, I was a member of the Constitutional Court, and it was considered, let's say, odd or unconventional that a constitutional judge meet offenders, those offenders, very relevant page in the Italian history, listen to them, talk to them, despite the wrongful and often horrible deeds that may have committed. Restorative justice made me feel at ease with these unlikely encounters, particularly because they took place always at the presence of the victims, whom also I was able to meet, listen to, and acknowledge. More relevant, I had the chance to witness the quality and the power of the relationship between some of the victims and some of the offenders of that tragic page of the Italian history. It's impossible to speak about these issues without have not seen what it means. The encounter, l'incontro, seems to me the core of restorative justice. The encounter is the starting point of a new idea of justice, the idea of justice that I was looking for, that I was longing for. Here we have some outstanding protagonists of restorative justice coming from Ireland. Thank you for coming. And let me quote a very well-known song of the U2, an Irish group. We all know the words of the refrain, and still I haven't found what I was looking for. That's my feeling. I came across a number of excellent expressions of justice, wonderful judges, tribunals, the Constitutional Court, international courts. How many expressions in the human civilization looking for a more perfect justice, always a more perfect justice, and still never is enough. Nothing is enough. I still hadn't found what I was looking for. After years and decades of study and work in the field of law and justice, after years in one of the most relevant institutions of the justice system, the Constitutional Court, I still hadn't found what I was looking for, the practice of justice that I was looking for. It is difficult to explain, but those who have had the opportunity to witness to an experience of restorative justice know very well that it is the most convincing practice of justice available to us, human beings. It's not a perfect one. but it is the most convincing. Restorative justice, the practice of justice that we are looking for. Restorative encounters trigger new possibilities, initiate new paths, address complexity, are deeply respectful of the victims as well as of the offenders, of the human dignity of everybody, intervene meaningfully vis-à-vis the irreparable. This is not only because restorative outcomes are forward-looking, but because the presence of the other, of the most unlikely other with whom to open a dialogue, brings about something that mysteriously is capable of quenching a bit our thirst for justice. Restorative justice seems more apt to address the justice needs of all those involved in stories of injustice, be they victims, responsible persons, bystanders, the community as such, and the state. Restorative justice ensures, even in highly conflictual and violent contexts, non-violent, non-aggressive, safe, comfortable times and spaces where to find out the unexpected. Something new that overcomes hatred, resentment, isolation, mistrust, revenge, the cycle of violence. I am sure that we all shall feel a certain unease in addressing this promising matter, calling for peaceful coexistence among victims and perpetrators in a moment where the war has become back at the heart of Europe. We have here a unique opportunity, though, to pay attention to the lessons conveyed by the witnesses of restorative dialogues. There are many here. To quote those mentioned in the program, Miss Griffith, The Encounter of the Encounters, the Parents Circle from Israel and Palestine, and others. Let them be our masters, our teachers. Let's use the restorative lenses to see through their stories and their journeys in search of peace and justice, a peaceful justice made of just peace. As a Minister of Justice, one of the main challenges, as you all know and work for, is to find a wise and realistic way to embed restorative justice in the national and international justice system. On the one hand, it seems necessary to avoid that restorative justice become just an added on or an on the side to criminal justice system that remain unchanged. On the other hand, as widely recognized, restorative justice can sometimes be an alternative to criminal justice, but in many other times, more often, it can complement it. The issue here is how to craft an active relationship, a positive relationship between the two, how to allow a fruitful interplay between restorative and traditional instrument of criminal law. There is still a lot to do, I think, for a cross-fertilization between restorative justice in criminal matters and the law, the harmonization of their respective languages, and the mutual reinforcement of their indeed common values and main objectives, especially if we refer to the Italian constitutional provision of Article 27. I think that we are just at the beginning of a new era in the history of the idea of justice. In conclusion, let me address, as one last point, a short set of future challenges in restorative justice agenda selected in a subjective way, debatable way, from my own institutional point of view. The first challenge is about inequalities and accessibility. A common effort is needed to overcome the persistent inequalities with respect to the level of implementation of restorative justice in European countries. Today, we have a certain number of formal legislation or soft law instruments, but not yet enough factual implementation of them, which results in an unequal possibility of access to restorative justice by those interested. Second, restorative justice, even when available, is still underused in the vast majority of the country. The reason seems to me identifiable in a lack of awareness and maybe a lack of trust. We distrust what we don't know by the legal professionals and by the citizens alike. Restorative justice, Professor Patrizia was saying the same things in different words, is still a stranger in our society. There are a lot of misunderstanding to be dissolved and clarified. And we need indeed, to this purpose, a culture of restorative justice alongside an appropriate legal framework. Academic courses, training for professionals, and awareness-raising campaigns for citizens should be put in place in the framework of the action plans advocated by the Venice Declaration. Third point. This is a question for you. Is restorative justice a right, an individual right, or rather a service, a public service? There is an ongoing debate on this point. Let me just highlight something that is very dear to me, also as a former scholar of constitutional law that devoted a lot of time to researching in the field of human rights. There is something, a danger that should be avoided. In the language of human rights, there is a dialect that speaks a very individualistic culture. Let's consider that, to my eyes, the strong point of restorative justice is the encounter, the relationship, something that is different, that is beyond the single individual. Fourth and last point, the scope concerns the scope of restorative justice. As stated in many different documents and also in the Venice Declaration, restorative justice is a new culture that is called to permeate the criminal justice system. But experience first and research, suggest that restorative justice carries a potential to respond to justice needs also outside the criminal justice system as such. For example, in prison contexts, in neighborhoods and communities, in cities, Tempio Pausania experience, in schools, in hospitals, in the health systems, in institutional organizational context, and many others. Restorative justice calls for an ongoing lifelong social education at large to support citizens in becoming more able and skilled to overcome conflicts, small and large, in a constructive way. In this sense, restorative justice and restorative practices are an asset in building better social relations and constructing more just and peaceful societies. Justice is the equivalent of harmony. We need more harmonic society and relationship in this time of ours. Restorative justice, then, is the potential to foster a culture of responsibility in the micro, meso, and macro levels, from interpersonal conflicts to institutional conflictual contexts and international settings. This is an age of anger, fear, resentment, hatred, war. In this age, the practice of restorative justice can give an essential contribution in addressing the most urgent needs of our time. In the long term, the dissemination of a restorative mindset promises to transform step by step, little by little, the quality of our relational horizon, with the aim of preventing the outburst of the irreparable dissent which opens wound that cannot be healed. After 2 years of pandemic, in the middle of a war, and in the aftermath of decades dominated by an extreme individualistic culture, restorative justice offers all of us that a possible response that we are looking for, fit for the relational character of the human experience, where the other is not bound to be an enemy, a rival, or a ghost, but is part and parcel of the experience of the self. Thank you so much.